Hello, guys and gals. It's me, Mutahar. It's a late night, and somehow Cyberpunk 2077 is yet another little controversy. Now, this controversy is not something that I want to just kind of laugh off. You know, have you ever? I want to ask you guys in the comment section before we continue the video, okay? How do you guys feel about paying for a video game mod? Now, me personally, I actually don't like paying for video game mods. I actually stay far away from anybody that's selling video game mods, okay? Simply because I don't really think that, you know, I've never come from a culture where paying for video game mods make any sense. You know, on my channel, I've covered so many video game mods. You know, you go back like 9-10 years, I was playing GTA Vice City zombie mods, which were total conversions, entirely released to the community for free, and even to this day, like literally as of a week ago, I'm playing through an entire mod of Half-Life 1, for instance, where it's like, you know, the cyberpunky future. I love the modding community, okay? If it wasn't for the modding community, I don't think that I would probably have a good chunk of the gaming videos on this channel. I don't even think that a good chunk of the creepypastas that I've read would ever have been a thing. But anyways, for anybody that doesn't really know, there's been a huge controversy surrounding this VR mod for like Cyberpunk 2077. So you ever play a game like Cyberpunk and you're like, whoa, let me slap on the VR headset there and just walk around Night City? Yeah, it looks pretty goddamn cool. And if you have the hardware for it, heck yeah, give it a try, ladies and gentlemen. But in this case, what has actually happened is CD Projekt Red decided to jump in and go after the person that made this mod. So Jan Rossner was like, I'd like to briefly address the discussion around this Cyberpunk VR mod. So a guy called Luke Ross made it, and they issued a DMCA strike because Ross was charging people money on his Patreon for access to it. Now, according to CDPR, this was like violating the fan content guideline, so they're never going to allow monetization without their permission or some agreement. And they were in touch with Luke, they talked about it, and they even said, listen, you can just literally ask for donations. Now, of course, Luke in this situation was like, fuck that shit, I'm gonna delete my mod, and I'm gonna take my ball and go home. Now, obviously, look, I'm not a fan of paid mods, but I am a fan of nuance and the facts, okay? So what I'm about to say is gonna be filled with nuance. And you may not agree with what I have to say, but just please hear me out. So Luke over here's like, thanks, Jan. I'm sorry, but I don't believe you are within your rights in demanding that my software need to be free. It is not derivative work or fan content. It supports a large number of games which are built upon different engines, and it contains zero code or assets from your IP. Saying that it infringes your IP is equivalent to maintaining, for example, that Riva tuner violates game publishers. There's a lot of software that, you know, you probably have fucked around with on your computer that, you know, enhances things like video game graphics, you know, things like reshade and whatnot. And it's kind of hard pressed, you know, if a company, let's say, for example, you know, Bethesda takes down reshade because people use it to modify Skyrim and make it look prettier than it is. Well, is that legal? Is it okay? Well, imagine if Reshade has no code that belongs to Bethesda. Is it okay to DMCA a piece of software that doesn't even have code that belongs to you? I think that shit ain't fair. So again, I decided to go closer into our buddy Luke's Patreon site, and he decided to basically make a whole war and fucking peace against the corpos that are CD Projekt Red. Very cyberpunky in this case, okay? Very nerd shit we're talking about. So as usual, they stretch the concept of derivative work until it's paper thin, as though a system that allows visualizing 40 plus games and fully immersive 3D VR was somehow built making use of their intellectual property. And as usual, they give zero fucks about how playing their game in VR made people happy, and they cannot just be grateful about the extra copies of the title they sold because of that, without ever having to pour money into producing an official conversion. The bottom line is all that matters, and gamers be damned. Now, I feel like this is pretty huge coming from somebody that's selling like a VR mod for a video game, which again, you could probably say, listen, it's not easy to get shit like VR running in video games. A lot of these developers probably should make some money if they're making mods. Like, generally speaking, a lot of developers that I know that make cool mods, like graphic mods, put them on Patreon, but usually I can just wait like a month until they're available for free by the developer, not through like some shady other third-party website. Anyways, he's like, am I a little bitter about this? Yeah, you bet I am. Especially in the same week when Meta pulls the plugs on 3 VR studios. Especially after 4 years during which I spent so much time keeping our mod alive, in spite of CDPR's constant breaking updates, which is very true. Every time you know why? Cyberpunk 2077 is literally the only game that I've played so much that I actually started to mod. And I stopped modding it because every fucking month, CD Projekt Red would just send out another update and just destroy my mod list. So I just stopped doing it, simply because I didn't want to just keep breaking the game and pulling my goddamn hair out. But anyways, they basically said that they never even knew or cared all this time that this mod was there, and they're only reacting because somebody reported. Now, to be fair with you, I actually kind of sympathize a little bit with Luke, even though I don't agree with paid mods. His software, from what I understand, wasn't necessarily something that took any code from Cyberpunk 2077. So if that's the case, why the fuck is the company taking it down with a DMCA? It kind of just doesn't make any sense, in my opinion. This actually reminds me a fair bit of back when Atlas had decided to issue DMCA takedowns to RPCS3, the PlayStation 3 emulator, and specifically their Patreon page, because at the time they were promoting a lot of Persona 5 underneath it. Now, I imagine that CD Projekt Red went after the page because it promoted the mod alongside Cyberpunk 2077 with the paid option. And in that case, if they're going after the use of their IP in relation, then yeah, actually it's a pretty valid DMCA takedown. But if it's primarily on the actual code of the material and the code does not belong to CD Projekt Red, that's where things do end up getting wrong. So I want to make that distinction very clear. Now, of course, ultimately speaking, no real value was lost here, because let's say you're somebody that wants to play Cyberpunk 2077 in VR, well, you can go to Vorpex and they actually distribute Cyberpunk VR as a free download. Now, would I recommend you play this game in virtual reality? Honestly, I probably have to try it after this whole drama just because I have to experience Night City in VR, but to be fair with you, virtual reality, this is just a side tangent. I swear, I don't know how you can deal with motion sickness literally after 20 minutes of playing a game like this, but that's nor here nor there. Now, modding is one of those things where I feel like a video game mod really does drive sales like crazy, and there's no doubt that that Cyberpunk VR mod that Luke made probably did lead to some extra sales for CD Projekt Red. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, is he deserving of the money? I mean, if it's his own code, sure, you can charge money for it, but I think it's kind of a douchey thing to just remove your mod entirely and just rip it away from gamers to access, simply because of this situation right here. Honestly, he probably could have just put that specific mod. I don't know how his modding stuff works, if it's just like a separate executable file that you can just plug the game into. But if there was a specific mod for Cyberpunk, bro, just make it free with a donation download button. I'm sure there's still nerds out there that'll give you money just for the game, okay? People will donate if you're at least not a dick about it. But when you go to things like modifications, look, there are big mods like Cyberpunk 2077 where multiplayer like CyberMP is something that is still apparently in the works, and I'll be damned, this probably, again, it's a freely distributed mod, but it's one thing that's out there that people will obviously clamber onto and get extra life out of a game that they purchased, for $60. You could finish the game 100%, but the beautiful thing about mods is that literally they add so much extra free content to a game to the point where the game itself can almost be an entirely new product. And there is no better example of that than something like Star Wars Genesis. Now, again, this mod thankfully hasn't been removed by Disney or Bethesda, but it's also distributed entirely for free. For anybody that doesn't know this mod, it takes, Starfield, the dog shit that game is, adds all of these extra features on top of it and more. And again, this is such a huge mod list that just the mod itself is 100 gigabytes, okay? So you got 140 for Starfield plus 100 just for the mods. But I played a bit of this, and it is probably one of the best mod packs, total conversions that I've actually ever played. You've also got other situations like Grand Theft Auto Carcer City, where for anybody that doesn't know this There's a set of modders that are actually putting an entire GTA story, complete with its own city, Carcer City from the Manhunt franchise, into the actual game, San Andreas. And again, it's entirely for free. People can download it, play it, and get extra time out of it. I'm pretty sure if this was a paid-for expansion, or somebody was charging money to access it, like on Patreon, this is a situation where Rockstar would probably get in and shut down the mod. Which I guess does make sense, because if you're using their IP in that instance, I think that is a better example, right? Where they actually use like Rockstar's intellectual property and then sell it on Patreon for people to access. And again, even if you're not selling things, right? Like there are situations like Bully, which I believe the YouTuber Swekta put together. This is a multiplayer mod for Bully, and I actually completely expected this to get taken down. Like the fact that you could, you know, have a game as controversial as Bully, where again, back then when the media was talking about this, like the bullying simulator, imagine it having a multiplayer so you could just bully people online. And then, God forbid, somebody mods AK-47, Bullsworth turns into an entire fucking battleground at that point. That, ladies and gentlemen, is probably one of the reasons I suspect that this mod isn't even available anymore. And I don't even believe this was a paid-for experience. So yeah, when it comes to copyright, intellectual property, companies ultimately have the control. But, you know, a lot of the mods that we've looked at utilize the actual IP. They actually sell, or, well, they utilize the IP to the point where, like, they couldn't sell. Like, you can't sell something like Bully multiplayer. You can't sell something like GTA Carcer City. You couldn't even sell something like Star Wars Genesis. Why? Because they utilize literally the IP right there. But something like Cyberpunk VR, if it didn't actually use any code from CD Projekt Red, should it be taken down? I don't think so. You know, there's mods like GTA Stars and Stripes where, again, it's gonna blow your mind here, but you literally have like entire modders putting together the entirety of the United States, and not just the entirety of the United States, but literally the parody version of the United States. Like, you've got, instead of Texas, you've got Nijis, which instead of Dallas, you've got Bison. You know, you've got Leonida with Vice City. You've got Liberty up here, you've got Lincoln here, San Andreas there. I mean, an entire community putting this together, an entire map, all the states, everything brought up, that's beautiful. That's interesting to see. And ultimately, the reality of it is, if they charged money for this, they would get taken down. DMCA's up the ass. You know, if you got things like GTA Mysterix, right, with the creepypasta mod, if you started selling that, instant takedown. So, you really can't sell mods, but it makes sense. You can't sell a mod with an IP attached. But if it's its own separate code, I think it's bad precedent to, you know, have companies DMCA and remove it, and those being possible. You know, the thing that really like kind of hits me about this too is that, you know, when it comes to a lot of these paid for mods, like I think one of the most egregious offenses to this is probably something that you would have known as like the upscaler mods. So there's a lot of these that exist, like Starfield, for instance, like back when it launched, in order to get like frame generation and a lot of these things, you have to go to a modder known as Pure Dark, who would make individual modifications for certain video games. Now, I don't think it's necessarily cool to be paying Patreon bucks to access these kind of things, which is literally the reason why I use lossless scaling. And I think people who, you know, want to actually get access to frame generation and things should pay $8 for the rubber ducky on Steam and just get access to all of that shit basically for free in any single game that they want. But imagine if, you know, CD Projekt Red decided to take down this mod simply because it added in extra functionality, like graphical functionality to Cyberpunk 2077, right? Like imagine if, you know, CD Projekt Red was like, no, we don't want to go through these guys for like upscaling and frame generation, we'll just down... It doesn't make sense. If it doesn't contain their code, shouldn't be removed. That's at least just my perspective on the situation. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, mods, man. You know, the actual discussion here is that, you know, forget Cyberpunk, we're at a point where people are kind of looking at paid mods with a little bit more scrutiny. Look, at the end of the day, realistically, if the code isn't there, if no Cyberpunk code exists in the mod they took down, that's a false DMCA takedown. But at the end, look, if you're going to be charging money for modifications, especially for video games, and you know the reason people are downloading your mod is because of its connection to a video game, Look, instead of charging money like that, just put up a donation link. I'm sure people will donate money and call it a day. I think it was somewhere around the, ballpark of like 20 grand a month that was being earned from these mods or whatever, which, you know, again, if you're in the modding scene and you make a killer mod, the paydays can be pretty nice. But look, at the end of the day, ultimately, if he had just put a donation link up, probably would have gone by without any fucking issue whatsoever. But yeah, paid mods, they suck. But look, if you're not really breaking the law, then ultimately I am forced to defend you. But goddamn, never put me in a situation where I'm defending paid modifications, man. I hate any form of this crap to begin with. I think probably the worst offender is like Bethesda with like their paid creation packs. Like Starfield modding is literally just like pay like 800 credit. It's like going into the Xbox like microtransaction store in the 360 era and just like buying points to literally purchase like 2 weapons, maybe like a small dungeon here and there. Mods are great, okay? I always love supporting modding communities. I even donate money to like, mods that, just exist. Companies like gamers release them out of their kindness of their hearts. And for a lot of people, they release it, and sometimes they put it on a resume and they get a pretty sweet gig in the gaming industry down the road. Those are always the ones that I love to shout out and support. But I think this whole trend of paid gaming modifications is something that, listen, if you want to pay for this stuff, fine. But it just always it always puts a bad taste in my mouth to see that kind of shit happen. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.